All right, everyone. We all think we know the story of the Persian Wars, right? Little, free Greece standing up to this gigantic, tyrannical empire. But when we look at the very first phase of that conflict, the part under King Darius, is the story really that simple? Well, today, we're putting that common historical verdict on trial.
So, this is the exam question, the big idea we're tackling. And look, on the surface, the answer seems pretty obvious. I mean, you think of the Battle of Marathon and you immediately think, yeah, total failure. But a simple true or false just isn't going to cut it here. It really doesn't do justice to the complexity of what Persia was trying to do, its hidden successes, or, and this is key, the incredibly biased nature of our sources.
So here's our game plan. We're going to break down Darius's policies piece by piece. We'll start with his response to a huge rebellion, then look at his territorial and diplomatic wins, and then, of course, we have to talk about the famous setback at Marathon. And finally, we'll get into the crucial difference in perspective between our Greek sources and what the Persians themselves had to say.
Okay, let's get into it. To really understand Darius's strategy, you can't start with Marathon. You have to start with the Ionian Revolt. This was a massive challenge to Persian rule in the Greek-speaking world, and how Darius handled it, well, it tells us an awful lot.
Now, our main source for all of this is the Greek historian Herodotus, and he gives us this incredible, almost cinematic detail. After Athenian soldiers helped the rebels burn the Persian city of Sardis, he claims a furious Darius ordered a servant to repeat this line to him at every single meal. Herodotus is framing this whole thing as a personal, emotional quest for revenge. But let's set aside the personal drama for a second and just look at the hard facts. The outcome. Yeah, the burning of Sardis was a shock, but the Persian response, it was systematic, it was overwhelming, and it was decisive. The rebellion was completely crushed at sea, and Persian control was slammed back into place. From an imperial point of view, this wasn't a failure. It was a clear, resounding success.
And here's what's so important. Darius's response wasn't just about brute force. The Persians put in place some really sophisticated reforms to make sure the region stayed stable. They forced cities to settle disputes in court instead of with raids. They set up fair and predictable taxes. And, get this, according to Herodotus himself, they even replaced unpopular local tyrants with democracies. I mean, this is the work of a smart, strategic empire, not one that's failing.
And that success in Ionia? It wasn't a one-off. Darius's strategy was much bigger than just putting down rebellions. He was actively expanding Persian power, using both his army and his diplomats.
Take the expedition of 492 BC. History often remembers this as a total disaster because a freak storm completely wrecked the Persian fleet. But that's only half the story. The land army was actually very successful. It brought the Kingdom of Macedonia firmly into the Persian Empire and secured the whole northern Aegean coastline. So, was it a setback? Absolutely, but it also produced some really significant territorial gains for Persia. Just a year later, in 491, Darius completely switched gears. He went for diplomacy. He sent messengers to every single Greek city-state demanding earth and water. This wasn't just a quirky custom, it was the ultimate symbolic act of surrender. A way of saying, we acknowledge the Persian king as our rightful ruler.
And you know what's wild? Look at the result. Sure, Athens and Sparta famously refused in a pretty dramatic fashion, but a huge number of other Greek states said yes. We're talking about almost all of the islands and major players on the mainland like Thessaly and Thebes. Darius was successfully expanding his sphere of influence without firing a single arrow.
And the submission of Aegina was a stroke of genius. Why? Because Aegina was a major naval power right on Athens' doorstep. This move caused absolute panic in Athens and actually forced Sparta to intervene against a fellow Greek state. It's a perfect example of how Persian diplomacy was successfully dividing its enemies and destabilizing the very heart of the Greek resistance.
Okay, so all of this brings us, finally, to the event that everybody remembers, the invasion of 490 BC and the legendary Battle of Marathon. This, right here, is the cornerstone of the whole total failure argument.
And Herodotus once again just perfectly captures the psychological earthquake this victory caused for the Greeks. It was completely transformative. It shattered this myth that the Persians were invincible. It proved the empire could be beaten. And we really can't downplay how huge this moment was for Greek morale.
But, and this is a really big but, how did Darius react? Did he just pack up his things and say, well, that's that? No way.
According to Herodotus himself, the defeat at Marathon only made Darius more determined. He immediately started gathering troops and supplies for a second invasion, one that was going to be much, much larger.
So here's the crucial point to understand. From the Persian perspective, Marathon was a temporary check. It was a logistical setback, not a final strategic defeat. The only things that stopped Darius from coming back to Greece were a major revolt in Egypt, a much more valuable province, and then his own death. His plan to conquer Greece was absolutely still on the table.
To really get this, we have to grapple with the massive difference between our sources. The story we all know is almost entirely the Greek version of events. But what did the Persians themselves think was going on?
Let's just start with motivation. Herodotus gives us a personal, emotional soap opera about revenge. But if you look at Darius's own royal inscriptions, you see a completely different picture. He presents himself as this universal ruler chosen by the god Ahura Mazda to bring order and justice to the world. For him, war isn't a personal vendetta, it's a divine duty.
And this right here perfectly illustrates the difference in scale and perspective. In Herodotus's history, the fight with Greece is the main event. It's this epic struggle for freedom. But in Darius's own inscriptions, where he lists all the peoples of his massive empire, the Greeks, or Yauna as the Persians called them, they're just one name in a very long list. For Persia, this was a problem on a distant frontier. For Greece, it was a fight for their very existence.
So after weighing all this evidence, after looking at it from both sides, how do we answer our original question? Was Darius's attempt to control the Greek world a total failure?
When you lay it all out like this, the picture is obviously mixed. He had huge successes. He crushed the Ionian revolt. He secured the northern Aegean. He got tons of Greek states to submit. But he also had major failures. The defeat at Marathon is undeniable, and he never did manage to conquer mainland Greece.
So calling it a total failure is a dramatic exaggeration, one that really comes from only looking at the story from the Greek point of view. A much more accurate answer is that Darius's policy was a partial failure in its biggest, most ambitious goals, but it was a meaningful success in its more limited, strategic ones. The Persian Empire he left behind was stronger and larger on its western border than the one he started with.
And that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. Do we see Darius as a failed conqueror just because of Marathon? Or should we maybe see him as an unfinished emperor? A ruler whose grand strategic project was simply cut short by fate before he could see it all the way through? The answer you give really depends on which side of the story you choose to tell.